Hello, so in this video we're going to take a look at exploring hex editors. It's possible that at a hackathon you might have some capture the flag events that require you to use a hex editor to explore and find some valuable data. For this particular example, I'm going to be doing this on the Windows side, and I've gone out to the internet and I found one called Hex Editor Neo, and this is one that you could download for free. They've got a free program that you could use that will be sufficient certainly for the initial examples. If you wanted to find a different hex editor that runs in a different environment, that's fine as well. They pretty much all have the same bells and whistles as far as the basic capabilities. Let's take a look at what a hex editor is all about. So I've also gone out to the internet here and I've downloaded just two JPEG files. Okay, so the first one here is a picture of a computer, pretty straightforward looking laptop type guy. When I double click on it, it gets interpreted by the Windows photo, and that's what takes a look at this. And then I also went and I grabbed one of some angry looking bunnies. All right, so these are just two different pictures that when you double click on them, because they're JPEGs, they end up getting interpreted as pictures. The data for these files gets displayed and all the different colors show up on the screen. Okay. Now, what is a hex editor supposed to do? A hex editor does not try interpreting the data that makes up the file. Instead, it actually shows you the raw information. Okay? And this can be quite useful when it comes to different forensics or investigation type problems, let's say. So what I'm going to do here to start is I'm going to take my first picture here of the computer and let's drop it into Hex Editor Neo and see what it looks like. Okay? So I've dropped it in, and what you have here is you have thousands and thousands of lines here of information, and this is all of the raw data that actually goes and makes up the picture. Some of this stuff along kind of your center section you'll see is entirely in hex, and then the next column over, which kind of shows it in blue, this is kind of the data actually being interpreted. So some of it will actually try to interpret what do different symbols and numbers and things like that mean. So kind of along the middle, like I said, you've got your raw hex numbers, the values, and then along the right is an actual interpretation of those. Okay, and that's kind of what you have when you're looking at a hex editor. And if I were to just kind of look at the raw data with my eyes, it just looks like a bunch of numbers and junk. It doesn't really make any sense to me. But it could be a way that someone trying to be sneaky might have taken just maybe one or two little lines of information and hid it here inside the actual data. And so visually looking at the raw bits might reveal something that by double clicking on the picture, all I saw was the colors. I didn't actually see that there was a secret message hidden in there. Okay. Let's dump into the next picture as well. So I'll grab in this next guy, and you see it just opens up another tab. And here I've got just the next few thousand lines of data here that interprets the next picture. Okay, kind of all the way down. They're definitely different pictures, but by visually examining the raw data, it doesn't make all that much sense to me in this form. Okay. Now, how could this information be kind of used maybe in a little bit more of a sneaky way? Well, it's important to take a look and see that the files here, the JPEGs, they have what's called this beginning of file code, okay, or the beginning of file. All right, so the very first few bits, you'll notice they both start with this FFD8. Okay, both of the files, FFD8 is what begins the file. And this is what can indicate that this particular file is a JPEG. And whenever we have a JPEG file, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of it again to see where the data ends, you'll notice that it ends with FFD9. Okay, and so this is for a well-behaved file, a beginning of file code and an end of file code that lets the computer know, hey, this is where the file starts, lets the application know this is where the file is going to begin, and this is where the file is going to end, so that it can interpret data from beginning to end and display the entire picture. Okay, the question here kind of becomes, what happens if I were to insert data after the end of file code? So let's say I wanted to come in here and I wanted to actually write some information after the file. So on the upper right of Hex Editor Neo, there's this kind of little green pencil that you can click on to say I'm now going to be in insert mode. And so now when I click in here, I might go and I might actually type kind of over here in the blue, and I might say, hello, how are you? Okay, and so what you can actually see here is I'm actually editing data, I'm adding in raw stuff, and then the actual hex bits sort of get added here in the middle, and I'm adding in an extra message after the file ends. Okay, and if I went and I were to save this, I'm going to save and rewrite over this picture. Yes, I'd like to save and continue. Okay, you see now I've actually have this information saved to my picture. And when I double click on my picture, I'm not going to see any visual change because from beginning to end of the file is still being interpreted from the same data. But I now have this secret message that's going on after the fact. Okay, so this is how I could hide a message inside a file. And if I were to maybe take this file and copy and paste it or email it to someone else, I could be transferring hidden data along to them that might only be viewable outside of something like a regular picture viewer. You would need a hex editor or something like that to actually go and view it. Okay, so this is maybe one way that I might transfer hidden data or look for secret little messages actually inside the code of a file. So if we've got a random picture that's just sort of sitting here as maybe one of my events, one of the thoughts I might have is this just a picture or is there something else going on? Maybe I should take a look at where does the file begin and where does the file end, and a hex editor might be useful for something like that. If I wanted to take this a step further, what I could do is say, maybe I could hide an entire other file inside of this. So if I'm hiding, or excuse me, if I'm clicked here inside my rabbit picture, I could press a Control A, which will select all of the information, all these thousands of lines of code, okay, or bits. I could select all of them, and then just do a simple little copy. Okay, and I've copied all of the information. And then again, so long as I'm in insert mode, I could come over here and I could say paste after my little hello message. And now I've pasted a whole bunch of data inside this picture that is actually all of the data necessary to interpret the next picture. Okay, so there's the entire message that this FFD8 is now inside of here. Okay, and it's just like before, if I were to go ahead and hit save, okay, yes, are you sure? Sure, I'll go ahead and I'll save this document. I've now saved this picture, and when I double click on the picture again, you'll see it just looks like my normal computer, because the computer will start interpreting data from that beginning of file code all the way up until the end of file code, and then it stops. Okay? And in this particular case, I had a little hello message in there, along with an entirely separate picture. So if I wanted to undo this process, what I could do is I could click all the way at the start of my picture, and then do the find feature. You could hit Control F to pop open the find feature, and I'm going to switch over to hex. Okay, so I'm going to search for a particular hex string. Okay, and what I'm going to type in here is I'm going to type in FFD8, because I learned that that's what a picture might start with, FFD8. And when I go and I hit find, you see it went and it jumped to the very first one. Okay, if I go and I click on an F3, or you see the next little magnifying glass over, it says find next. And then it jumps all the way down to, hey, here's the next FFD8. And remember, FFD8 indicates that that's where the next file would begin. So what I could then do is, starting at that particular point, copy all of the bits, all of the information, all the way down to the end of the next file, or all the way down to the end here. Do something like hold Shift and click at the ends. And this would allow me to copy out the information that's necessary to recreate the file that was hidden inside the carrier file. Okay, so this is a very common technique for trying to hide data from one file inside of another. So something like this, I could hit copy and then make a new one and paste it inside and actually extract the image that I currently have hidden. These little bunnies are hidden behind the scenes inside my computer, okay, inside my computer picture. So learning how to use a hex editor, learning how my files begin and how my file is supposed to end, and then doing some quick little searches to figure out where does the file actually end and is there any additional information hidden inside of it. It can be a very, very good technique when you're looking at trying to examine a file further. Another good indicator could be if I were to double click on something like this, if I were to right click on it and go to properties, then you could get an indicator maybe by the size. Now this particular picture you see is only a couple hundred kilobytes, which is not too abnormal for a modern picture. Modern pictures, if it's a couple kilobytes, if it's a couple hundred kilobytes, maybe if it's a megabyte or two, or a really high quality, might be a couple megs. That's really not too abnormal with pictures today. However, if I saw the picture and it was, let's say, 100 megabytes or 200 megabytes, all of a sudden this really starts to indicate to me, I bet you there's something else going on there. I bet you it's not 200 megabytes worth of picture data, not with a normal resolution like what we might have. So realizing that the file size could be an indicator, especially if the file looks a little bit bigger. However, the quality of the picture is pretty low. This one happens to be a full 1920 by 1280. but I might have a picture that's only maybe 600 by 400 or something like that. And if that ends up being a meg or two, it's probably not just a picture. There could be some other data going on there. So that could be another indicator to looking at the file size and saying, does this make sense? Again, though, the downside, like what we saw when we typed in our own little hello message, things like that are going to have very minor impacts on the file size. So looking with your eyes with a hex editor can go a really long way to kind of discovering the full truth going on with a file.